Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the Tories. It's going to be one of those days, you guys. 3, 2, and 1. Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the stories topping our headlines tonight. The PM meets with Canadian premiers to update them on Trump trade talks. Americans say a deal without tariffs could be possible, according to political columnist Brian Lilley. Says the one-year anniversary of the devastating Jasper wildfire is observed. A political fire rages on between the town and the premier. An Alberta riding makes Canadian history for having the greatest number of candidates on one ballot.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Canada's premiers in Ontario today to update them on the state of trade negotiations with the U.S. as an August 1st deadline to get a deal in place looms. They're gathered in Ontario's cottage country today to discuss the latest U.S. tariff threat and removing internal trade barriers.
We are looking for the best deal for Canada. We are only going to accept the best deal for Canada. That is very much informed by our discussion. What we collectively can most control is building a stronger economy, moving from reliance to resilience and division to unity. That will require two things. First, support for affected industries, lumber, steel, aluminum, automobiles. Crucially, what we're looking to do is support those industries to build bridges, to build a stronger Canadian economy, to build forward. So if it's lumber, it's building more houses in Canada. It's developing new markets around the world as we work with the Americans.
Prime Minister, it's so important that we hear from you about the status and the negotiations with the United States. And I always say I'll always have the Prime Minister's back dealing with President Trump. We all know he can say one thing one day, and he'll be out on Fox News or wherever, changing everything. So we need to stay united. We're all hoping for the best and prepared to do our part, each province, each territory. And I've always said President Trump increases tariffs. This is my personal opinion. I don't speak on behalf of COFF. We need to make sure we match tariff by tariff, dollar for dollar, and hit them back as hard as we possibly can.
Last week, Prime Minister Carney said it was unlikely there would be a deal without tariffs. But according to political commentator Brian Lilley, the Americans are now saying a deal without tariffs is possible.
They've clearly said a deal is possible if we open up enough, but we don't know what that means. And so if I was one of the premiers in the meetings with Prime Minister Carney earlier today, I would have asked him two questions. Is a deal possible without tariffs? And what's the price? Because it might be a price we're willing to pay.
You can catch my full interview with political columnist Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun coming up right after Business News. The premiers of Ontario, Alberta, and Saskatchewan have signed a memorandum of understanding calling for the construction of new pipelines using Canadian steel. The announcement came prior to the premiers meeting with the Prime Minister today.
We know their strength in taking a united front, but we cannot achieve our shared provincial goals without cooperation from the federal government. Alberta knows this. Saskatchewan knows this, Ontario knows this, and it's time for the federal government to acknowledge it as well. And if Prime Minister Mark Carney doesn't want to work with us, it's not just myself and Scott Moe he'll have to worry about. He'll also have to contend with Premier Doug Ford, who has said many times he'll be all over him like an 800-pound gorilla. So it's time to get rid of the bad laws that have harmed Canada's ability to grow the energy sector and other industries such as mining and manufacturing.
This new agreement will help move Western oil and gas to new and existing refineries in southern Ontario and to northern tidewater with deep sea port in James Bay. It will connect Ontario's critical minerals in the Ring of Fire region to new ports in Western Canada, helping to build a true end-to-end critical mineral supply chain. All of it will be built using great Ontario-made and Saskatchewan-made steel, creating jobs, attracting investment, and unlocking the full potential of our economy. And all of it will be done in partnership with Indigenous communities.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says bottlenecks need to be removed. He reiterated the need for pipelines to East Coast refineries and access to shipping ports in the Northwest. An Alberta community has made Canadian history for having the greatest number of candidates on one ballot. It also means Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre will face close to 140 opponents when he runs for a seat in Parliament in the August 18th by-election in the riding of Battle River Crowfoot. Elections Canada reported Monday that 132 of those candidates alone are sponsored by one advocacy group called the Longest Ballot Committee. The group wants a citizens' assembly in charge of crafting a new electoral system. The Longest Ballot Committee's previous record of 91 candidates was broken last week when it reached 100. Poilievre, meantime, has sent a letter to the leader of the government in the House of Commons, Stephen McKinnon, saying he is, quote, demanding action against a blatant abuse of our democratic system. Poilievre adds that the group is confusing voters and undermining democracy by flooding the ballot with unserious candidates. Sadly, politics is creating a smoky haze over the one-year anniversary of the Jasper wildfire. 1 year ago this week, the massive blaze forced thousands of people, including 5,000 residents of Jasper, to evacuate the national park. Last week, Jasper published its own review based on surveys and interviews with more than 300 firefighters and other emergency personnel. While the report said the overall response to the wildfire was a success, it noted some issues were caused by the Alberta government trying to get more involved in decision-making. Premier Daniel Smith took offense, demanding an apology, and today the opposition NDP jumped into the fray.
I'm sorry, Your Majesty, you're not actually the Queen. You're the Premier. And public servants accept responsibility, something that this government has had a great deal of trouble in trying to do. Jasper and Alberta deserve real leadership, not petulant, entitled politicians who lash out and can't brook any criticism whatsoever. This is a town in recovery. This is a town where businesses are struggling to come back. It's a town that lost 1/3 of its structures. And we know that we have to help in this recovery. And the provincial government, by the way, has done a lousy job of that as well. We have people living in temporary housing. We had the provincial government using this yet again as an opportunity to pick a fight with Ottawa and not build the housing that the town of Jasper says it needs in the hopes that they could, I don't know, own the libs, try and win a fight with Parks Canada. And as a result, the pace of housing construction in Jasper has been far, far slower than it needs to be.
And while there has been no apology, the municipality of Jasper has since released a statement saying it believes emergency response deserves thoughtful dialogue, not division. It says the community recognizes the province's role in responding to the fire and providing critical support after. The Insurance Bureau of Canada says that as of July 7th, rebuilding permits have only been issued for 56 of the 358 buildings that burned down in Jasper last summer. And while we're talking about wildfires, as of this afternoon, there are currently 61 wildfires burning across Alberta in the forest protection area. 16 are classified as out of control, 12 are being held, and 33 are under control. There have been 10 new wildfires since yesterday, and since January 1st, 816 wildfires have burned more than 670,000 hectares of land. The latest numbers from the Crime Severity Index have been released by Statistics Canada with promising results. The volume and severity of police-reported crime in Canada reportedly decreased 4% last year. StatsCan says nonviolent crimes such as property and drug offenses dropped 6% in 2024. But at home in Lethbridge, the city saw a more impressive drop in crime rates. BCN's Landon Hickok has more details.
Lethbridge once held the highest CSI rate in the country between the years of 2019 and 2021, in part due to having twice the average national property crime rate. However, there has been a complete shift as the latest numbers show Lethbridge has shaved almost 19% off its total crime rating.
While there is still work to be done in Lethbridge, and I want to repeat that because it's important. We think we've got great numbers, we're trending the right direction, but no, there's always work to be done. But when we see numbers dropping like this, we're very, very pleased that we're trending in the right direction.
In 2024, Lethbridge posted a CSI rate of 117.8, with a decrease of 18.5%. That is the third largest drop in the country, just behind Kamloops and Red Deer. Similarly, the Lethbridge metro area dropped 18.7% to 105.5. Violent crime in the city has dropped 6.6% to 135.7, and nonviolent crime has dropped an even further 23.2% to 111.5.
We've also seen an increase in clearance rates across all CSI categories, meaning more crimes are being solved and offenders are being held accountable. And according to our latest community survey, 70% of residents report feeling safe in Lethbridge. Last year, we hired 26 new police officers and 4 community peace officers. So far this year, we've already added 12 police officers and 3 new CPOs, with plans to hire additional officers for an upcoming class this fall.
Specifically, Lethbridge Police says there has been significant drops in types of crimes, including break-and-enters, mischief, vehicle thefts, and theft from motor vehicles. But Deputy Chief Gerald Gromeyer says that collaboration work with the city in key factors such as social services and revitalizing the downtown core have been some main contributors.
We've seen significant steps being made by the city of Lethbridge, the investments they've made, the work with the encampments, the social outreach. You know, we still have an opiate epidemic, not in this city, but in this country and in North America. We need more strategic investment in those areas to address those root causes. And you look at the investment that the city of Lethbridge has done in the downtown, add on to that the increase that we've been able to establish with our downtown patrol unit, the extra resources we have down there, the extra visibility of our police officers, the very quick response that we've been able to have downtown in Lethbridge. That has made a significant difference in conjunction with the work that the city of Lethbridge is doing.
Chilliwack, Kamloops, and Winnipeg now hold the highest CSI rates in the country. Lethbridge now drops to 9th on the nationwide list, just above 10th place Edmonton. For Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
Hollywood celebrities are coming forward to comment and pay tributes to Malcolm Jamal Warner following his death by drowning in Costa Rica. These include his TV dad, Bill Cosby, from the sitcom bearing his name, and Adam Sandler, who also had a short stint on the popular 1980s show where he played the character of Smitty between 1987 and 1988. And here in Lethbridge, we are still in the wake of a drowning incident involving a 17-year-old boy whose life was taken by the Old Man River last month. As BCN's Naveen Day reports, these incidents are a reminder about water safety during National Drowning Prevention Week.
July 20th to 26th is National Drowning Prevention Week. It occurs every year in mid-July when Canada's drowning rate is at its highest. This year, the week coincides with World Drowning Prevention Day, which occurs every year on July 25th. The Alberta and Northwest Territories branch for the Life Saving Society uses this week to educate the community on risk factors that can result in drowning.
For adults, typically the major risk factors that we see are not wearing a life jacket, swimming alone, drinking alcohol. When we're talking about children in Alberta, in our most recent report, we see that 100% of drownings for children under 5 years old were due to distracted supervision or lack of supervision.
Data from the Life Saving Society says 67% of drownings occur in natural bodies of water like lakes, rivers, and oceans. Here in Lethbridge, a 17-year-old boy drowned last month in the Old Man River while he was attempting to cross it near the high-level bridge. What's fishy about the Old Man River is how misleading it appears to be in terms of safety.
In Alberta, we actually see that rivers are the #1 location where people are drowning. So there are a lot of additional risk factors that come with outdoor unsupervised environments, but especially with rivers, we see additional risk factors as well. There are a lot of underwater hazards that are entrapment hazards. So even if you're a really strong swimmer, it's very easy to get your limbs or your clothing stuck in these rocks or deadfall that are underwater you might not necessarily be able to see, and that can get you into trouble really quickly. currents, of course, we live in Alberta, so regardless of what time of year it is, the water is always cold, and that can affect your motor function. Like you were saying, sometimes the rivers might look calm on the surface, but there is such a thing as undercurrents. And what happens there is it doesn't look what looks like is safe, might be safe on the surface, is not necessarily an indicator of what's going on below.
The Life Saving Society adds, lifeguards are your ultimate poolside companions. A mere 1% of drownings occur in lifeguard-supervised settings. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
And Health Canada has issued a recall notice for tens of thousands of above-ground swimming pools in the country after 9 drownings in the U.S. The recall notice says more than 260,000 of the recalled pools were sold in Canada since the early 2000s. The notices cover a range of Best Way, Intex Recreation, and Polygroup pools sold by major retailers as far back as 2002. Another 5 million pools are under a recall advisory in the United States. And in other news, if you're heading off to Hawaii on vacation, take note of this. Volcanic activity continues at Hawaii's Kilauea volcano, which is erupting yet again. The volcano is one of the world's most active and has been erupting on and off since late December of 2004. How beautiful. Yet how scary. Also climate related, a powerful thunderstorm that blew into a popular tourist area in Vietnam capsized a tourist boat, killing at least 35 people. Well, this survivor tells a harrowing tale of how he escaped.
Thuyền lật, nước tràn vào bên trong. Anh cố gắng để thở được những lần gì đấy để tiếp tục nước dồn tiếp vào. Anh hít một hơi xong rồi anh phao lặn xuống nhưng mà những gì cái ánh sáng lên anh lặn tìm ra cái ánh sáng đấy là sau đó mo lên thì mình lại thoát ra được ngoài thuyền và anh trèo lên trên thuyền lật để cầu cứu.
Wow, terrifying. All from a thunderstorm, too. Imagine that. Back closer to home in Alberta, it seems we won't have any more rain in the city for the next few days. Recent rainfall and cooler temperatures have reduced fire threats. However, warmer conditions are forecast in the coming weeks, potentially increasing the risk of wildfires again and prompting authorities to update fire restriction downgrade to a fire advisory in Lethbridge County. In a statement, the county says the move from a restriction to an advisory will now allow for controlled burns and fireworks with a valid permit. Although the risk has decreased, wildfires can still easily start in a dry or windy conditions. Please be cautious when conducting any type of burning activity. The county continuously monitors weather conditions and other data to determine when burning restrictions are needed. A fire restriction or prohibition may be issued if conditions do change. Air quality and visibility in Lethbridge continue to swing up and down, and it's due to smoke from nearby wildfires. Environment and Climate Change Canada has issued a special air quality statement indicating that even though the air quality is at low risk, you should limit your time outdoors. Consider reducing or rescheduling outdoor sports, activities, and events. You may wonder why or how the smoke can linger in the air even with the rain in the city. Well, Christy Kleiman-Haga, a scientist with Environment and Climate Change Canada, explains.
So when you're looking at smoke and rainfall, you often think that as soon as it rains, it will clear up. Not always the case. You know, it really depends on how heavy the rain is, how persistent and how concentrated that smoke is. So there's a lot of variables at play. Sometimes if the smoke is at very high levels of the atmosphere, you can see air quality worsening slightly as that rainfall happens before things start to clear out. Particles can be washed out a little bit with the rainfall, but it's not a perfect system. There's so many factors, fluctuating variables when you're talking about smoke particles in the air, raindrops in the air, and how that works. We're still in that lower to moderate risk on and off through today and tomorrow. Air quality and smoke is a tricky thing, and you can see, some fluctuation, especially as things are starting to clear and we're starting to get into better air quality. To be, seeing that smoke less so in the region.
Some recommendations from Environment Canada include using a clean, high-quality air filter in your ventilation system or a certified portable air cleaner that can filter fine particles. And with all of that, I will be right back with a look at our local and national weather forecast. We barely got over 11 degrees today, nowhere close to that high of 16 degrees. Lots of local smoke in the forecast today and tonight, even through that rain. Local smoke staying with us into Wednesday. However, the sun will come back again. The sun will come out tomorrow. And look at those temperatures. So we're finally back into July type numbers. So high of 23 degrees on Wednesday, and then up to 27 for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then 26 on Sunday, back to 25 degrees on Monday. We could see some showers again on Monday, but the good news is we are out of the teen temperatures. I don't even think we got to the teens today. We'll be back closer to average, which is 26 degrees for this time of year, 11 degrees the average low. 36 was the record high in Lethbridge on this day. That happened back in 1936. And in 1910, Lethbridge saw the record low, which was 2 degrees. So record high was 36, record low was 2. 5:48 is when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening right at 9:27. So we're looking at 15 hours, 39 minutes of daylight today, 2 hours shorter than yesterday. Mainly sunny conditions on the west coast tomorrow, high of 23 in Victoria, more like 18 near the water where the onshore winds blow, 50k winds in the Juan de Fuca Strait there, 24 for the high in Vancouver, 27 inland. Now Edmonton and Calgary, seeing fog patches dissipating in the morning and then increasing clouds throughout the day, high of 22 in both of those cities. As we look to the rest of the prairies, we saw air quality warnings in effect today for Saskatoon and Regina. Widespread smoke still in the forecast for tomorrow for both of those cities. High 20 in Saskatoon, 19 Regina, 24 for the high in Winnipeg. 30% chance of showers with that widespread smoke as well due to those wildfires. Getting into the central part of the country and beyond, we're seeing a lot of sunshine, and look at that warmth there. 28 for the high in Toronto, Ottawa sitting at 29, and Montreal coming in at 27 tomorrow. Getting into the Maritimes there, we are seeing mainly sunny skies across much of the East Coast here. 27 for the highs in Fredericton and Halifax, high of 23 in Charlottetown. 40% chance of showers in St. John with high of 20 degrees. So there you have it. That is your forecast. The Insurance Bureau of Canada says better disaster recovery is needed as the country faces an increase in emergencies. It's calling for national discussions on how to better manage rebuilding in the aftermath of increasingly costly disasters. IBC says that as of July 7th, rebuilding permits have only been issued for 56 of the 358 buildings that burned down in that Jasper, Alberta wildfire last summer. IBC's Vice President of Climate Change and Federal Issues, Craig Stewart, says rebuilding delays are happening more frequently after major disasters and suggests a central agency to help manage recovery could improve coordination. Ford has recalled over 694,000 vehicles due to a fuel injector issue that possesses a potential fire risk. The recall impacts certain Bronco Sport vehicles from 2021 to 2024 and Ford Escapes from 2020 to 2022 that are equipped with 1.5-liter engines. Ford's investigation into the fuel injectors found that they pose a risk to crack and leak inside the hot engine compartment, with corrosion looked at as a contributing factor since the spring of this year. Since 2022, Ford has performed multiple software updates in order to detect a possible leak. Owners will be able to update their engine control software for free from certified Ford service providers until a final remedy is available. And now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 47 points on the day to finish at 27,364. The Dow was up 179 to 44,502. The S&P 500 was up 4 points to 6,309, and the Nasdaq was down 81 to 20,892. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 50 cents to 65.45 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 7 cents to 3.25 US. Gold was up 32.55 to 34.3141 US an ounce, and silver was up 37 cents to 39.29 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $7.78 per bushel, barley is at $6.31, canola is at $15.55, and corn is at $7.34 per bushel. Live cattle were down 25 cents to $224.97. Feeder cattle were up 67 cents to $328.27, and lean hogs were up 40 cents to $107.75. All those are August contracts. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 73.50 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, on the same day provincial and territorial premiers met with Prime Minister Carney to talk U.S. trade, they were also signing their own trade agreements. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario signed a memorandum of understanding calling for the construction of new pipelines using Canadian steel. The governments of Manitoba and Saskatchewan have signed a memorandum aimed at expanding trade through the Port of Churchill on Hudson Bay. And BC signed new agreements with Manitoba and Yukon to boost trade and labor mobility between the provinces and the territory. Coming up next, we chat with Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley on Canada-U.S. trade talks, the sentencing hearing for Chris Barber and Tamara Lich, and so much more. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or our YouTube channel anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. This week begins sentencing hearings for Freedom Convoy frontrunners Chris Barber and Tamara Lich. But is the prosecution politically motivated? Well, we are going to chat about that with political columnist Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun. But first, Prime Minister Mark Carney is meeting with premiers from across the country to update them on trade talks with the United States. So will there be more tariffs or will there not be? Joining me now is Brian Lilley. Brian, welcome back. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's get right into the Trump trade talk. So last week, Prime Minister Carney said that it would be rather unlikely that there would be a deal without tariffs, but the Americans are now saying a deal without tariffs is possible. So what's changed?
You know, as is often the case, it's the message coming out of Washington. And, you know, this is an area where I've been very critical of the Carney government. I don't think they've handled the negotiations and the trade talks with Trump particularly well. I think he has the wrong person in charge in Ambassador Kristen Hillman. I think it should be Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, or I think it's still that Dominic LeBlanc. That's the guy that I think should be in charge. Their cabinet positions may have shifted a bit, but because you need a political closer in there. So I've been critical of him on that, but on the other hand, dealing with Donald Trump is a bit difficult. I was speaking with one Liberal MP who said, look, you got to remember, it's like you're wrestling a huge gorilla naked and in the dark. You don't know what's coming next. And Trump is kind of like that. He'd been signaling that there would be no agreement without some form of tariffs. And so I thought when Prime Minister Carney came out last week ahead of the cabinet meeting and said that to reporters, that it's unlikely, that he was softening the ground, that he was trying to prepare Canadians to accept the inevitable, which is a message I've been hearing since I was in Washington last February. But then this past weekend, Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, ended up giving an interview to CBS's Face the Nation. And Margaret Brennan, the host, was pressing him several times on what this means for Canada. Will there be a deal with Canada with or without tariffs? And he talked about how, well, most stuff already is, enters the U.S. tariff-free due to the nature of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement. But, you should expect smaller countries to pay a tariff, but the larger economies won't if, and this is the big if they open up their economies. And the fact is, we don't know what that means, Jeanette.
No, we do not. That's for sure. And like you mentioned, Trump, so unpredictable. And you mentioned, Brian, the Trump administration says that a deal is possible if we open up enough. So what does this mean? Do we know how open is open, or what do we need to be offering them? Do we need to?
Well, I think the Carney administration knows. I think the PMO knows. But do the rest of us? Look, there's a lot of Canadian protectionist policies that have been in place for decades, going back to the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, that, maybe they fit the time, but they don't necessarily, they're not needed now. protections for our big banks, our media companies, our telecommunications companies. Do they need to stay in place? Do the Americans want to see American Airlines or Delta or United flying Canada's friendly skies between, say, Red Deer and Saskatoon, or do they want the big American banks like J.P. Morgan Chase do they want their names on the bank towers down at Bay Street here in Toronto? We don't know, and we don't know if they want supply management. Do they want supply management opened up? Do they want it done away with? They've clearly said a deal is possible if we open up enough, but we don't know what that means. And so if I was one of the premiers in the meetings with Prime Minister Carney earlier today, I would have asked him two questions. Is a deal possible without tariffs? And what's the price? Because it might be a price we're willing to pay. I had a long discussion with Martha Hall Finley, who's at the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy, former Liberal MP, and she laid out the case, in her view, for why supply management should be done away with from a Canadian point of view and how it would, help the Canadian economy. But there's a lot of Canadians, and not just dairy farmers, attached to supply management or attached to some of the protectionist policies. But are you willing to say to every other industry in the country, you're going to accept tariffs as part of our new trade deal because we want to keep mostly Quebec dairy farmers happy? That would be a tough sell for Mark Carney. So we need to know a bit more about what's going on in these negotiations. What's up for grabs?
Yeah, no, exactly. Speaking of trade agreements, so Saskatchewan joined the agreement that Alberta and Ontario signed a few weeks ago on building new trade and energy infrastructure. And premiers have talked a lot about cooperation and dropping internal trade barriers, but have they actually made any progress on that front?
There has been some progress, and I would say that Alberta and Saskatchewan and Ontario have all been quite good at that. There's memorandums of understanding between all of them on dropping that. Nova Scotia's been quite good. Quebec, less so. BC, Manitoba, they're kind of preoccupied with wildfires at the moment, so I'll cut Premier Wabkinew some slack. But there's been some progress, but the idea that all of them are being eliminated, I don't think is realistic. Every province wants to hold on to something. These are all policies that were put in place for the most part to protect a local industry, to give a local business a leg up over a competitor from another province. They just shouldn't exist, but that's why they're there. And so there's always political pressure to look after your own. And so the idea of getting rid of all of them, highly unlikely. The federal government has gotten rid of their portion of interprovincial trade barriers, but I expect some provinces to hold on to a portion of theirs, and some provinces a bigger portion than others.
All right. Let's switch gears here completely. Coming up tomorrow, July 23rd, is the start of 2 days of sentencing hearings for Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, two of the organizers of the Freedom Convoy. And they were convicted of mischief back in April, and now the Crown wants sentences that you, Brian, say show this to be politically motivated, a politically motivated prosecution. You're not the only one saying this, by the way. So tell us more.
Well, nobody gets 7 or 8 year sentences for mischief in Canada. And that's what Tamara Leach and Chris Barber were convicted of, mischief. That can result in a very short custodial sentence, or in most cases, no custodial sentence at all, meaning no jail time. The Crown is asking for 7 years for Tamara Leach and 8 years for Chris Barber. I mean, they weren't convicted of the other charges of intimidation or counseling to intimidate. They were convicted of mischief. We have people convicted of heinous crimes in this country getting very light sentences, often with the approval of the Crown, not just because a judge said so, but with the approval of Crown prosecutors. So this tells me that this is even more politically motivated on the part of Crown Attorney Dallas Mack. That's the name of the lead Crown Attorney in Ottawa. There is no way that they would be going forward with such ridiculous sentence recommendations without the approval of Crown Attorney Dallas Mack. He's not the lead, but he would have to approve this going forward. The justice in this case is a woman named Heather Perkins McVeigh. So let's hope that she has more common sense, more wisdom than Crown Attorney Mack, because 7 and 8 years is a ridiculous sentence. You know, you can loathe the Freedom Convoy as much as you want, and there are plenty of people in Ottawa, especially downtown Ottawa, who do. But you need to have a justice system that operates on principles of fairness and justice, not retribution. And that's what this feels like. Part of the sentencing recommendations cites that, well, there was a lot of money lost. Well, there's still a civil proceeding going forward as well. So, you know, are you going to sentence them to 7 and 8 years because of money lost by various businesses to the local city of Ottawa economy, and then try and pry that money from them in a civil case as well? None of that seems fair.
Yeah.
And look, I'm one of those people who said, yeah, the people in the Freedom Convoy have a point. On a lot of their issues, they have a point. Some of it was misguided, especially there was that one faction that wanted to say, we want to meet with the Governor General and replace the government. You know, that was crazy, but that wasn't Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, by the way. But, you know, I was also the guy who said, you've got to be a law and order person, and these guys should have been told at the end of the first day, go home, come back tomorrow. You can't live on a street indefinitely. I opposed what they were doing, but I also opposed the Emergencies Act, and now I oppose a 7 and 8 year sentence. You've got to have common sense and fairness, and it seems like with the Freedom Convoy, all kinds of people, but especially on the so-called progressive left, have thrown that out the window, and they want anger and retribution. They wouldn't, you know, if you and I were calling for this for a heinous murderer, they would be saying, well, this is not how we do justice. But on the Freedom Convoy, they're willing to suspend that. Let's hope that the judge doesn't do that. So there'll be hearings on Wednesday and Thursday. Then Justice Perkins McVeigh will take a couple of weeks to draw up her sentence. I'm hoping for a slap on the wrist, like no custodial sentence. Tamara Lich has already spent 49 days in jail, a 45-day trial. This has cost the taxpayers millions upon millions of dollars. We don't need more costs added to it. Let's move on.
Keeping on the topic of courts here, Brian, last week the Supreme Court issued a ruling overturning an adult sentence for a man just shy of his 18th birthday in a heinous murder. And you say this ruling will make it nearly impossible to hand out adult sentences in the future. So tell us more about this one, Brian.
This is a guy only identified by his initials as IM, and he approached a group of guys he knew who were all over the age of 18 and said, look, I want to get a gun, and I believe this guy has a gun. Now, IM was 17 years, 5 months old at the time of this offense, which he has been convicted of. And the others involved in the attack were convicted and given adult sentences because they were over the age of 18. They approached this other kid from the neighborhood who was shoveling snow next to his family home and said they wanted the gun, and then proceeded to beat him. 12 stab wounds and 10 blunt force injuries later, he was left to die in the snow. They then went into the home, pistol whipped this 17-year-old's mother, and ransacked the house looking for the gun, which they didn't find before the father and brother came home, at which point they fled. IM brags about his role in this attack, which he knows led to somebody's death. He brags about it to another friend, shows off his bloody clothes, leaves the country, and isn't arrested until he comes back 2 years later. He's convicted and given an adult sentence. Now, the Supreme Court looks at the legislation, looks at the judge's ruling, and says, no, this is wrong. The legislation just says the judge has to be satisfied that the Crown Attorney has made the case that the underage youth has the moral culpability to have an adult sentence, that they knew what they were doing. The Supreme Court now says, no, you must prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, the same as a murder conviction. Except how do you know someone's inner workings to that degree? Parliament had considered changing the legislation more than once. They considered changing the legislation to include the very part that the Supreme Court has now read in. That the Crown has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they had the moral culpability. And they rejected that at least twice. And the Supreme Court has now said, no, this is the way it has to be. They have rewritten the law against the will of Parliament on sentencing to fit with their own political views. Justice Suzanne Cote, who wrote the dissent, it was a 7-2 decision, she blasts her colleagues in that. And this ruling will effectively make it impossible or near impossible in most cases to say that a 17-year-old who commits a heinous crime should get an adult sentence.
Yeah, Brian, that is a horrible, horrible story. But it looks like we are unfortunately out of time here. There were so many more questions I needed to ask you, but thanks so much for being with us today, Brian.
Thank you.
Federal political columnist Brian Lilly of the Toronto Sun. Well, Lethbridge and southern Alberta have a fascinating, rich history to look back upon, and we perhaps don't take enough time to reflect upon it, but today's guest is going to help us do just that. Lorian Johansson is the Vice President of the Lethbridge Historical Society. Welcome to Bridge City News, Lorian. Great to have you on today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I always love to talk about Lethbridge's history.
Awesome. Okay, well, with that said, maybe give our viewers a brief snapshot of what your organization is all about. It's not just Lethbridge history, right? But southern Alberta, all of southern Alberta?
That's correct.
Okay.
So the Lethbridge Historical Society is a chapter of the Historical Society of Alberta. Our chapter covers the southern Alberta region, sort of from just south of Calgary down to the border. So it does encompass quite a lot of southern Alberta, including all of the small towns. They're free to access our resources, and we do a lot of work with them as well. We do tend to focus on Lethbridge because that's where we're based, but we do also cover a lot of other things in the region.
Okay, great. Well, maybe give us an idea of what takes place at a typical meeting or gathering of the Lethbridge Historical Society.
Well, we have several different options as far as gatherings. On the fourth Tuesday of every month during September through April, we host a general meeting for our membership where we conduct a little bit of business and then we move into a presentation format. We invite guest speakers from all different walks of life come and speak to our members and guests about things that are relevant or interesting. We've had horticulture, and we've had how to plant a victory garden in your front yard or backyard. We've had it was fascinating as what kind of vegetables you can grow in southern Alberta that you can then turn around and eat to be a little bit more self-sustaining and environmentally conscious. That was a really great one. We've talked about our plaques and monuments project. Anything that really would be fascinating or interesting to our membership and to the general public. So that's one of the ways. We do also conduct tours, walking tours of the city and local area. Some of them are the Downtown History and Beer Tour, which most people are familiar with. That was initiated by the LHS here. And we do some for general public. We do some for the membership. So we have a lot of tours that take place throughout the year. We have several coming up actually over the next few months. And then the other thing is to join the executive council and sit on the board with the rest of the team. So that happens on Monday. So there's several different ways to get involved.
It sounds like it. So obviously this is something people can join in. How can people maybe join up for your group?
The easiest way is to attend one of the general meetings and sign up for your membership with one of the executive that's there. We do also have a website, lethbridgehistory.org, and memberships are available through there, as well as a contact us form. So if you have questions, you can certainly submit an email request and somebody will be able to guide you through becoming a member.
Okay, so why don't we begin with the name of the city? So I think a lot of people assume the name Lethbridge stems from the famous bridge that spans the coulees, but that isn't necessarily the case now, is it?
It's not at all the case, actually. Lethbridge was named after William Lethbridge. He was the president and largest shareholder of the Northwestern Coal and Navigation Company. You know how the NMAX Center is named after the sponsor, NMAX? Lethbridge is something similar to that. He got the city named after him because of his money that he invested into the company. He never actually visited Lethbridge at all, not even once.
Oh, wow. Well, that's disappointing. So it all comes down to money, right?
Unfortunately, that's the case.
Yeah.
It has been for a long time.
It's a little bit more of a romantic notion to think it's about the bridge, really.
Sure.
I can see why the rumor got started.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense, but it's completely a coincidence that it's Lethbridge and we
Right.
have a bridge.
And then we become Bridge City. Yes, I know.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So, I mean, speaking of the bridge, that iconic high level bridge is often referred to as the longest in the world. And there are, of course, longer bridges elsewhere, but I believe it's
There are.
still the longest of its specific type in the world. Can you maybe share a little bit about the history of that bridge?
Of course, the bridge is in fact the longest for its height and style in the world. Nobody has built anything that's longer and higher of the same style trestle
And that would be
bridge.
like the trestle bridge. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
It was announced in 1906 and completed 3 years later. It is still the largest single railway structure in Canada. It was put into place to shorten the trip to Fort Macleod. Instead of having to go down and around the river valley, the bridge was put in place so that they could just skip over the top and shave off several hours at least of their train journey. The walls on the side of the bridge, you've seen them there, they're to make sure that the trains don't get pushed off by our wind, our beautiful wind in southern
Oh my
Alberta.
gosh, that's
It,
scary.
it's a
I didn't
safety
even think that's a
safety
possibility, but now that you said it, that's
Well,
scary.
the wind can get pretty powerful down here in southern
Oh,
Alberta, so they put those measures in place. The construction of the bridge is actually considered a national historic event. Over 100 men worked on the construction of the bridge. There were a few deaths during the construction. Safety measures for workers were not what they are now. There is a very famous photograph of two men leaping off the last structure to be lowered into place. They were promptly fired after that. They did not die, but they were fired for their shenanigans.
oh my gosh. I think I have seen that picture, and they're jumping basically
Most
into
people
the
have,
river,
yeah.
right?
But they're jumping from the piece of steel off to the side
Uh,
of the
yes,
bay.
where the
Yeah.
land is. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's not as high as we think at that point, but
No,
still.
no.
Still. Safety first, gentlemen. Come on, let's not
Yeah.
give other people ideas, right?
In the early 1900s, they didn't have fall safe harnesses. They didn't have
There
any
was
of
no
those
such
things.
thing as safety back then,
That's
basically.
right.
I
Which
get
may
it.
be one of the reasons why safety harnesses and whatnot were put into place
Yeah.
as we moved through the 19th and 20th centuries, because people did things like that. I don't know. That's
Right.
just my speculation, but it makes sense.
There you go. Okay, so moving on from the bridge, we have a school named after, so we've got some other famous names here in town. So we have a school named after Nicholas Sharon and a hospital named after Sir Alexander Galt. And both were businessmen who started coal mines here. So to what degree did coal mining impact Lethbridge in the early years?
There were over 100 mines in the Lethbridge coal fields, somewhere between Picture Butte and McGrath. In 1919, we were the highest producing coal field in Canada. And it helped to determine where Lethbridge was built. It brought in industries such as Lethbridge Iron Works. Uh, it was a major employer, brought a lot of families to the area, and started other communities like Colehurst and Diamond City. Uh, it's almost impossible to quantify the importance of coal mining to our development. Uh, it it was the founding reason for Lethbridge's construction here. And then as we moved out of coal mining, that's when we moved into more of an agricultural community. But we definitely started as that industrial coal mining location. That's why the city sprang up where it did.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, in addition to that, Southern Alberta has a rich Indigenous history. So the River Valley has a park named Indian Battle Park, where Fort
Mhm.
Whoop is located. So maybe share a brief history about that.
The Indian Battle Park is the name that was chosen by City Council in the 1960s. And it specifically refers to a battle in the fall of 1870 between the Blackfoot Nations and the Cree Nations. It was a winter camping area protected from the weather and that. And where the high level bridge is now was a very natural crossing point in the river. Um, we do have a book about the Indian battle that went on there, several different editions. But the story of how these two nations fought over rights to the land and the ability to camp there, it's much more than I could cover in such a short time.
Oh,
But
yeah.
that's why it's named that, because our Indigenous peoples camped there and wintered there to stay safe from the elements.
Yeah, and then of course, speaking of Indigenous people, people from around the world travel to Alberta specifically to visit Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump. So for any viewers who have never heard about this or have ever been there, what is that all about?
Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump is it's a national historic site, it's a provincial heritage site, and a World Heritage Site, all of which were designated through the 60s, late 60s into the early 80s. It's a place where the Indigenous peoples would drive the buffalo off the cliff in order to harvest them. It is definitely a fascinating interpretive center there. If you haven't been, I definitely recommend it. It's a very eye-opening look into how Indigenous people manage to hunt in such large capacities. And there are guides and books available online that give you a lot of the details of the history of the location. But where it's one of our national heritage sites that we're very proud to be quite close to Lethbridge.
Yeah, I believe it's a UNESCO heritage site, isn't it? Yeah,
Yes.
that's amazing. Okay, now, Lorian, you mentioned agriculture earlier, and of course, that is a big part of southern Alberta, especially the sugar beet industry. So I believe that that also brought quite a few Japanese immigrants to our area. So maybe can you tell us a bit about that?
The sugar beet industry has been operating in Lethbridge to this day since the early 1900s. You are correct. Some Japanese immigrants moved here. They were recruited to work in the first factory in Raymond and in the beet fields. Some of these families their descendants are still in and around Lethbridge. During the Second World War, 2,500 of these Japanese Canadians were relocated here by the government to work in the beet fields. It was considered later in life, it was considered a human rights violation to uproot these families and move them here with no choice in the matter. The Canadian government did issue an official apology to the families in 1988, but those families did settle here, and some of them remain here to this day, or at least parts of them. So the sugar beet industry has always been important to Lethbridge and agriculture, some for good reason, some for bad, obviously. I mean, history, we like to think of history as this happy, nostalgic style thing, but some of Canadian history is not pleasant and it's not nice. And we have to acknowledge that before we can move out of that cycle. They say history, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. So by studying history and the real, honest, nitty-gritty facts about it, perhaps we can avoid those sorts of things as we grow and develop as a society.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Lorian. Very, very interesting. Great to have you on today.
Thank you again for the invitation.
Absolutely. Lorian Johansson is the Vice President of the Lethbridge Historical Society. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.